Well, it's great to be here. We're especially pleased that we were invited to come ahead of time so that we could get a flavor and a sense and all the nuances of these discussions and presentations. Jeremie and I have been working together to solve a society problem which is only getting worse, which is hearing loss due to noise exposure, which is an industrial problem in our core focus, but it is a society problem in general. So for the last 15 years, we've partnered up business and university to develop technologies, science to address this problem. So we talk about rethinking human capital. Our premise is that if you invest in the people, the returns will greatly outweigh any investment. Speaking of family business, my family has been in this industry, in the hearing healthcare industry, since the 1960s. So I resisted joining the family business for a long time. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. And it was also part of my mother's program that I go and be as an entrepreneur as much as possible and live in different countries and really just get it out of my system. And when I hit a really, really big wall, living in Hong Kong, she said, okay, you've had enough, come into the business. And so I got into the business. And as they were teaching me the business, I discovered that younger and younger people were losing their hearing, really had no clue what was happening. And so I said, well, there must be innovation in the space. And then I realized that the little foam plugs that you see or the earmuffs were actually developed in the late 70s. So there's been very, very little innovation in the space since that beginning. So I was like, this is very, very intriguing. And then when I was on the fence about, do we exit the family businesses or do we grow them or do I go into this direction? And of course, I wish I had been part of this organization. Maybe we'll made a few different decisions, when to exit. But my mother exited, and the moment that changed it was, so if you can imagine a clinic of mostly people in their 70s to 90s, right? And then one guy gets up in the middle of the waiting room, and he's really screaming, right? He's like, I don't want to be here. I'm not handicapped. And he's really raising his voice, and he's French, so there may have been a little swearing. Okay. And his wife says, listen, you leave this office, I'm divorcing you. It's game over. I can't take it anymore. You're screaming at your kids, right? You can't cross the street because the person had a very severe left hearing loss in his left ear. And what happens is if you can't hear from one ear, you can't localize sound, right? So that means you can cross the street with your kids and you don't see the car. You may not know where the car is coming from. So I grabbed him. My mother took the woman. And, we got to talking. And the story was, look, nobody told me about this. I'm 37 years old. There's no way I'm wearing an old person's hearing aid, right? So that's sort of how, when we started doing some research into it, that's sort of how we got into it.
Well, my story is slightly different. There is still a family connection. And when I was a teenager, actually, back in the days in France, I was really into these hi-fi systems, building my own loudspeakers, audio amplifiers, and so on. And one day, my grandfather came to me and asked me for a little favor, if I could design a little, help for one of his friends that was actually aging and losing the sense of hearing. And the only design criteria I had by the time, it was that it should actually fit into a cigar box. That was the thing. So, and I actually came up with something that was obviously wired, button receiver, and so on. And I don't know how it worked, but what I can tell you definitely is that from that conversation with my grandfather, I actually raised really a passion, for physics, acoustics, and this is really maybe something we can relate to when we had the other night, Philippe de Gaspier sharing the conversation he had with his grandson and the request, for access to clean water and fresh water and so on. So maybe it was, grandfather, grandchild, grandchildren, conversation it has something to do. Anyway, that really shaped my career, and I'm really a fully trained acoustician, joining the effort of noise-induced hearing loss.
So if I told you that 75% of the musicians inducted in the Music Hall of Fame had hearing loss, you wouldn't be surprised. You'd be like, yeah, I get it. A lot of heavy sound, hundreds of thousands of watts, and it makes sense that they lose their hearing, right? But if I told you that 20% of teenagers had hearing loss,
Well, that's actually a figure that came from the JAMA study in 2010. And that's really, people, young teenagers that are suffering from mild or more moderate hearing loss. But there is no clear explanation for that. This is not the fact that they are running, their motorcycles, their Harley Davidson. This is not the fact that they have been deployed, on battlefield and coming back. So, one of the thought is that it could be really, induced by the permanent music they are exposed to, be it in clubs or the music players and those personal MP3 and that kind of thing. So obviously that has a huge cost as well associated with this effect. And I think that the World Health Organization recently stated that this is now 1.1 billion people, all in all, that are subject to noise-induced hearing loss, be it recreational or occupational, as we mentioned earlier. So obviously that has a huge cost, and the cost that the figure that is given again by the WHO is 750 billion. But I think what's most important, is that we realize the societal costs that are associated with the hearing loss. You are connected, you hear me, through the sense of hearing. If that disappears, you're completely isolated, and this is a completely game changer. So this is really a very precious sense. And we are fortunate to have the WHO taking some lead. I'm part of an initiative called Make Listening Safe. So we are, having manufacturers, academics, and institutions looking into new regulation. But still, this is a very challenging problem.
So, down to the business. So I think you can get a flavor for, there's an academic who's developing some science that we can back for. So Jeremie does the R. So the big research, we do the D, and then take the products to market. Our first big product that we launched was custom-made hearing protection using a very unique technique. We were discussing this with some of you last night. You now can walk into the London Drugs and you can stand on a Scholl's type of scanner, and it'll scan your ear and then your feet and then make you soles. We actually developed the same type of technology, but for your ear. Ears are more unique than fingerprints. So to have something generic fit into the ear, very, very challenging. So we developed this technology that allows us to wear a funky looking headband. There's a part A, part B silicone inside the cartridges. They mix together under pressure, go inside of an earpiece while it's in the ear, expand, take to the shape of the ear, remove it, put the caps on, and in a 5-minute process, you have an earpiece that's taken exactly to the shape of your ear, right? So that was our first basis of our technology. If you look at the traditional way of doing something like that, and if any of you have gone through the process of having hearing aids, you will go to an audiologist, they'll take an impression, they'll send it to a lab, and then you go through that process. It takes a few weeks. We do it in 5 minutes. So we then use that innovation to develop some earphones, which we brought to market, mostly in the airports, that were actually safe for your hearing. So by using the same custom-fitting technology, we were able to isolate the sound so that people would not increase the volume, right? So what happens when your earphones don't seal properly is that you're feeling this extra sound, and your body doesn't make a distinction as to why you're increasing the volume. You're just increasing it to get the same auditory pleasure, right? And you'll notice that when you're on the plane. So you're on the plane, sometimes you plug your headphones in, and you're like, wow, how was that too loud? Well, probably somebody came from Montreal to Vancouver, and somewhere over Manitoba, the sound became louder and louder, and you just increased the volume, right? So these earphones allowed you not to have to do that. We also started working with an organization called Worldwide Hearing, which is actually a working group from the World Health Organization, in order to deliver hearing aids and use our technology to enhance the delivery system of hearing aids in the developing country. And this was one of the very marking moments in this career where we were working in Geneva. And with this organization, they sent us to the Holy Land Institute for the Deaf in Jordan. And the monk on the right is Brother Andrew de Carpentier, who went to the Church of England for the Archbishop of Canterbury to solve a problem in Jordan, in Salt, and stayed there the rest of his life. And he opened up a school to teach deaf and blind children. So as I was getting a little bit discouraged, to be honest, about the size of this problem, I went to a service where children who were deaf and blind were singing with their hands, right? So it really, really enforced the importance of the hearing and the fact that we only have 5 senses. And when I looked around, I didn't see a lot of people actually tackling this problem. Then, as we positioned the product into the US market, we hit a really, really serious wall. We hit a wall because the EPA in 1974-76, during the Reagan administration, or just before, actually put a label on hearing protection products, which I found was completely mind-blowing. So it puts a label to protect your workers, and it says, for example, the noise reduction rating, the performance of the device is 30 decibels. And then there's a disclaimer underneath it, and basically says the range of protection is approximately 0 to 30. Higher numbers denote greater effectiveness. So he's like, hold on a second. #1 occupational disease, billions of dollars in compensation, accidents, and a label on the product that says the products don't work. So Jeremy and I said, okay, let's develop a piece of objective software that measures the performance of the device.
And that was actually what I did during my PhD, and that what we call fit testing system was actually later sold to 3M and become now one big part of their assets. So it's called the EarFit in their branding. And this is really something that Nick again envisioned several years ago, saying one day all the earplugs will be tested for their efficiency in the field. I thought that was a little bit of an overstatement at the time, I should say. But now I realize, 10 years later, that this is actually what's going on, and all the Fortune 500s are now asking when they buy products that those products be fit tested to make sure that the workers are indeed protected. So if we are now back a little bit more to the academic world, I'd just like to present you a little bit of the family I'm building in Montreal. And so obviously just ETS, which is the university, my alma mater. I did my PhD over there. I'm a prof over there since 2010. And it's a school which is, again, very focused and oriented towards applied research. So it's really doing most of its research with industry. It's called Engineering for Industry. And if I present you a little bit of and it's now top 5 university in Canada in terms of engineering. And if I present you a little bit of my family, this is it. Those are all the researchers and students, so ranging from the interns down up to the master students, PhD students, postdoc researchers, and research associates. And obviously, we have a different area of research, but my role really as a team leader is to make sure that we are pushing some developing some nice knowledge, pushing those technologies to our partner ears. And for this, we have the support of what we call the NSERC, which is the National Science and Engineering Research Council, and so which is funding half by half this effort together with ears. And so not only are we pushing technologies, but I'm also training what we call highly qualified personnel, and those students and researchers will eventually be able to join, and that's the hope, ears, rather than be poached by some Californian company I wouldn't name here, but that did that in the past. And I was really moved and touched by what happened yesterday during the masterclass on entrepreneurship, because I think that's the third role I gave myself, is really to make sure that those family members can actually grow up within our ecosystem and bring more values and have really their entrepreneurial moment over there.
So of course we've had a few challenges. I think anybody who's launched anything innovative of marrying university partners who are essentially students, either doing masters and who have a different view of the world, and there is a publisher parish type of mentality, whereas at the ground level we're like, we need products, and the products have to work, and they're like, whoa, what? If I wanted a job, I wouldn't have done a PhD, right? So how to bring all that together? Well, it's not personal. I have a different type of job, okay? So, and it took us a few years to get that right. So the first year I was really crazy, and everybody was like, well, okay, this is not going to work. The second year I was like, okay, just take your time, and nothing happened. And then, we found a balance. And some of the magic, and this is a program that we want to showcase to the world when we're finished. We have one big shot that we'll tell you about in a few minutes. We want to showcase to the world that universities can work with companies. It doesn't have to be these massive organizations, right? And when you consider that less than 10% of the IP developed in university actually gets commercialized, there's an issue. right? And of course, there is exceptions like MIT and Stanford, right? But it's a different type of program. But in most of the universities, it's quite low. We're aiming for closer to 50%, okay? We have ambitions in 75, but if we can get to from 10 to 50%, I think we will have done, and we'll be able to showcase a model. If you have the chance to visit us in Montreal, we're with the university, and right across the street, we're in the university building, and they have given us an entire floor. So we have 15,000 square feet of space where we have all our business on one side and all the research together. But when you walk out of the elevator, you really get a sense that you're in a much bigger organization that's working together. So it's really quite unique, and we hope that in a couple of years we can showcase that. So our next big goal, we made the statement 10 years ago that noise-induced hearing loss was 100% preventable. We got a little bit lambasted by the media, by who are you? You can't talk like that. You're not a doctor. You're still a marketing guy with long hair. And now I challenge anybody in the world to find a website, a corporate brochure that doesn't make the same statements. So we're going to push it one step further and believe that in the next 10 years, we can completely eradicate noise-induced hearing loss in industry. We can't make the same promise for consumer just yet, but certainly in industry, we believe it can be done. And as a business, we would like to equip 30 million workers with our technology. So good news, bad news. The good news is the opportunity is still very much present, where noise-induced hearing loss in our industries of manufacturing, mining, oil and gas, aviation, is still the #1 occupational disease. So the customers we have right now, their claims for hearing loss are larger than the combination of all their claims, right? So the problem is very real. State of the Union, our target market is 100 million workers. Granted, there are hundreds of millions of workers in the world. We can only focus right now on what we call highly qualified, insurable workers, where if there is a problem, somebody's writing a check. Either it's you, or it's your workers' compensation board, and then it's deducted, but somebody is assuming a consequence for not necessarily doing the right thing. And today, these companies, and includes a lot of, yesterday we heard big numbers, 700,000, 300,000, 30,000 employees, are spending around $1.7 billion on products and solutions. Yet 30 to 60% of their workforce is already affected by hearing loss, right? And that causes 12% of accidents. Makes sense, right? You can't hear, you can't understand, you feel insecure, and accidents happen. The underlying of this accident is actually the stress that comes, the personal stress that comes from not hearing. And I think everybody can relate to this situation in a cocktail party, in a restaurant, where you're trying to engage in an intellectual conversation, but you're really having trouble comprehending, and you don't want to look stupid, and you don't want to ask the question. And when people ask, did you understand? Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm saying? Everybody says yes. The reality is they don't. And if you're challenged in an environment where there's noise around you and there's forklifts, and your boss comes to tell you it's 6242, I told you, not 6247. You got it? Yeah, I got it. That creates an incredible stress internally, okay? So that's what, and it's a very expensive problem.
I just noticed we have a clock ticking here.
Yeah.
1 minute.
So you can see the partnership, right? So somebody goes off on the tangent, somebody comes back to the middle. So the worker of the future is what we're presenting. It's a device that is worn on the lapel with 2 earpieces. So we're trying to make it look as much as possible like something they would wear today. A pair of headphones connected to an iPod Shuffle. And the device actually does 3 fundamental things. Yes, it protects you, because that's our core philosophy. It allows you to communicate. So here's what happens in industry. In industry, workers make a decision between being protected and communicating because, again, they're stressed and they have to do their jobs and they don't want to let their colleagues down, right? So communication is a key aspect. The third aspect, which makes this all possible, is what we call the monitoring, the IoT, the Internet of Things, the connectivity, which then allows us to tell you as employers at the end of each day, today your workers were protected, okay? So instead of going into a program where every 3 years or every 5 years in certain provinces, every year in the US, you go into a sound booth, you do a hearing test, and they determine, okay, you've lost 10%, 6%, 12% of your hearing. Go back in the next 12 or 48 months, go figure out what went wrong in the factory. Not gonna happen. Impossible to go backwards, right? This device allows you to tell you on a day basis. Our entry point is Mark, right? So not only does Mark work in a loud environment, he also works in a very, very dusty environment. And what happens with Mark is that he'll communicate using hand signals, up, down, and then when that doesn't work, the workers will leave their job site, they'll come together, they'll scream in each other's ears, and when they get frustrated, they'll actually remove their masks, right? So, which of course is then a problem for the lungs. So our technology allows Mark to communicate without using vocal effort, because we actually put the microphones inside the ear, and we pick up the air vibration inside the ear, transmit the signal through our device to the other worker, and they're actually having a normal conversation in a very loud environment without ever having to remove their mask. So we're playing around with some marketing taglines like hearing protection, but also good for your lungs. Save your ears, save your lungs. So,
I think we'll skip the demonstration. Otherwise, that's another 5 minutes.
So what we call the protected connected worker, right? So monitoring, I can't emphasize enough, that's really, really the differentiator. And the very, very encouraging news is that last year, the US Department of Labor, for the first time since they made this statement publicly in 1978, that there was an epidemic coming and everybody has to pay attention, the US Department of Labor launched a competition on a global scale. And they invited all kinds of companies to come and present their solutions to address this problem. 40 companies were selected. Of course, the picture gives it up, but 40 companies were selected. We were 10 companies that invited to present to every US acronym, the military, NASA, you can imagine, and we won.
So obviously, what you heard is really what's currently available. And what I'm just going to share with you just for a few seconds is really what's going to happen beyond hearing. So as Nick mentioned, there is this microphone inside the ear that keeps capturing your voice rather than being Laperle as I have here. And what I can measure from inside your ear canal is amazing. I have access to all your physiological noise. I can detect your heartbeat, your breathing rate. I can see if you're breathing by the nose, by the mouth, which is really useful if you're a minor underneath and I need to know how good you're doing. I can access of all the information with regard to your body movements as well. And I have footsteps. I don't need to have any tracking apparatus because all those signals are already there. I can obviously add some more sensor. If I'm measuring the temperature, I can detect, how intense you're working. If you're a female, I can probably detect your fertility cycles, and some applications do. I have access to your humidity. I can know a little bit of your stress. So there is many things that can be really measured into that ear canal, and you will see on the market some hearable, so wearable for the ear. There's really a name for that. We call that hearable. And that's really something that we are tackling with probably a good advance since we've been there for 7 years already on all those technologies. What I want to show you as well is a new type of sensors that we are slowly putting inside the ear. And those sensors are what we call electrodes. And the idea is that the ear is a very nice place to read what we call your brain waves. So when you're thinking, there are some neural activities and there are some electrophysiological signals that we can capture like EEG. And we do have prototypes of EEG and where we can measure actually your attention, your span. I could detect if you're or not bored, and actually as a lecturer I can tell you. But from the device I could confirm. And the idea is that there are some researchers doing what they call cognitive hearing aids, in the idea that when you're in the cocktail noise party that Nick mentioned, the hearing aid would know actually what you're paying attention to, just looking at your brainwave signals. And that's very useful, that's coming up. And in our field of research, what we're developing is what we call the brain-computer interface. That dream that one day you would just think and that would write down things for you. That's really happening. This is what we call BCI. And we are able to do and showcase some first prototypes of spellers, things that are able to connect the human to the machine. So there is obviously a lot of data to be gathered from that. Artificial intelligence comes into play. And speaking of data.
So the data is the new currency. Right? So this is something we talk, big data, artificial intelligence, and we believe that in the next 10 years, we will gather so much data about, what are the exact causes of hearing loss, how much noise, and then individual susceptibility. So we're actually developing some technologies right now which will be incorporated into our version 2 or version 3 that actually determine individual susceptibility to hearing loss, right? And these algorithms will be able to be then, licensed to the big mobile providers and actually put a cap on this so that you will know your levels of danger. On a business front of it, we're going to, yes, protect the workers. I think that's very clear. And we're also going to protect the employers, right? Because one thing I want to leave you with, and really we're going to finish with this, is that right now you could be a phenomenal employers like some of our partner clients on this new technology who are doing absolutely everything. And your worker will leave to go from here to Whistler on their Harley Davidson with an open face helmets, because those are very cool, without any hearing protection, and could actually do more damage on the ride to Whistler than a week in the factory. However, at the end of their shift, at the end of their career with you, they will not accept any liability for what they may have contributed to their hearing loss. So this technology will actually be developed in such a way that it will demonstrate to you, the employers, to your workers' compensation boards, that your workers did not lose their hearing at the job site. So it's data for the worker, and it's a win-win. Coming from, if I come full circle to the experience of Michael, who wanted to leave the office because he didn't want to get a hearing aid, there's no money in the world, there's no $35,000 compensation and free hearing aids for life that compensates for that. So it's actually what we, is really the win-win-win. Thank you.
Nick and Jeremy, thank you so much for inspiring us. I thought the only thing in Canada we could be proud of was our hockey. I mean, you've given us something. You're world leaders in this. It's very, very exciting. As you all know, we got a little bit of a late start, can we take a couple questions and then
Sure.
we'll move on? Do anybody want a couple quick questions before we move to our next presentation?
Thank you. My question is, how do you protect your intellectual property?
It's a very good question. To showcase the collaboration between the university, we actually built a very, very fair system where, because we have a lot of government funding now, millions of dollars of government funding, which was part of our strategy to say, okay, we're not going to do this alone. The IP is actually owned by the university. We get full access to it, exclusive basis, royalty-free. And then we have a very, very simple formula that the minute there's a major exit, a major financing, any kind of change of control, we have a clause that we can just ratchet back and pull all the IP, 100% transfer ownership, without having to reestablish the valuation. And it's a multiple of how much government money was put into the program. So it's very, very fair, very simple. And for us, it's fantastic because it saves us a couple $100,000 a year of having to pay the patents. And every time they come up with an idea, they call us and say, should we patent this? We say, absolutely. Because we're on the hook for the $80,000 that it can come to take it to the PCT.
Nick, I think it's absolutely fantastic what you're doing to protect the workers who are at risk of hearing loss. But could you explain a little bit more with respect to those who have already suffered the hearing loss? What can be done for them?
Well, I think this is true that nowadays a lot of the workforce is already suffering from some kind of hearing loss, and one of the abilities is really to merge, what was, a hearing aid and a hearing protector into a one device, that kind of bionic ear that you've seen, where indeed when there'll be noise and hearing some speech signal, those speech signals will be really enhanced in terms of intelligibility to be really clear. And the hope is really that people actually, will even wear, their hearing protection devices, in restaurants, because that will be actually more, useful actually for them and bring that technology. So the idea is that it's a merge, and just one thing that happens to take place in the United States took place just a couple months ago. In July, for the first time, Republicans and Democrats were able to agree on one thing. And that thing was, that thing was actually that there would be some, what they call over-the-counter hearing aid act, relaxing some of the legislation with regard to the EPA. And so many products will now be able to feature those kind of hearing aid or hearing reinforcement, personal sound amplification systems within products. So you will see more and more on that, be it in commercial apps, but as well in our product, which is really aimed currently for the industrial worker.
Wonderful. Thanks again, guys. Fantastic.